Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice is Ninja Theory's 2017 action-adventure dark fantasy, and now that it's been out for a bit over a year, I finally got around to playing it. Compared to other releases, I heard relatively little about Hellblade, and haven't actually spoken to many people who even know about the game, apart from a few friends who attended GDC. I avoided reviews and walkthroughs, and ultimately went into Hellblade without too many expectations. Now that I've played it, I'm a bit baffled that I haven't heard more about it. The story follows Senua, a young picked warrior who's on a journey into Helheim, the underworld of the Northmen, who invaded and destroyed her home, killing everyone she cared about, and one person in particular. This list of game attributes that I wrote, with only marginally arbitrary numbered scores next to each item, basically sums up how I feel about the game overall. It's great. The setting takes inspiration from Norse mythology as well as incorporating elements of ancient Irish culture, but even just a cursory examination of our main character makes it clear that this is absolutely a fantasy setting, first and foremost. I'm not knocking her look at all, I love it. When I first saw her, I thought for a second that maybe she was somehow the daughter of Monkey and Trip from Ninja Theory's brilliant previous entry Enslaved: Odyssey to the West. This method of utilizing aesthetic details that are recognizable and putting a different spin on them is highly practical when you want to build a world that feels unique and will have a recognizable look that resonates with your audience and reminds them of the experience later. Although it can bother some people who get a twinge in their chests whenever they spot an anachronism. Our main character's name, Senua, is similar to the name of the Celtic goddess Senuna, so similar in fact that a 2003 Guardian article misspelled Senuna as Senua. At first I thought that maybe Ninja Theory changed the name in order to make sure it would be a unique internet search, which I think is reason enough to do that kind of thing. And as you can probably already tell from this capture, this game is gorgeous. Senua is gorgeous. There are a few similarities in Ninja Theory's games that make me excited to hear about every project they might undertake, and this is definitely one of them. They are determined to cross the uncanny valley first and come out the other side of it with fake people that look way too real. In fairness, that's because Senua is real. She's this woman, Melina Jurgens, who is also a lead developer on the project. Her performance as Senua is haunting, and the hyper-realistic look of the character and how much emotion is conveyed in her face and her eyes is just so impressive. She's helped along by some really stellar direction throughout the game's many cutscenes, and one thing that stands out about her performance and the portrayal of Senua as a character is that they go out of their way to tarnish her beauty at every chance. It's always bothered me how common it is to prioritize keeping a female character pretty in spite of everything she might have gone through. I mean, I typically sweat mascara and that careful contour right off my face just from engaging in normal daily activities, so how is it possible for female action heroes to stay looking so freshly made up after fighting for their lives? Even in situations where a female character isn't impractically made up, it's still very common for action sequences to shy away from showing their character in any light other than a flattering one. In contrast to that obnoxious trope, just look at Senua and how beautifully ugly she's allowed to be in some of these scenes. It makes her feel so real and makes her pain and rage feel that much more raw as she expresses it in wild cries and shouting, contorting her face, and the camera refuses to cut away. As far as gameplay goes, Hellblade is going to feel frustrating for some people. I'm not even sure I can exactly explain why. It simply feels to me like that specific kind of game that I enjoy and that I've heard others complain about. I would not call it difficult. I played it on all its various difficulty settings, and I think I'm partial to the auto setting. I could almost feel where it made adjustments, and this is really only relevant during the melee combat sequences, in which your walking simulation is interrupted by the appearance of enemy warriors. Initially you fight them one at a time, but that doesn't last long. They will not wait for you to dispatch them one at a time, but they also won't swarm you exactly. There are situations that are like this, infrequent but significant, in which the point is to be overwhelmed. The fighting feels really nice. It's one of those systems where even if you're getting slaughtered, you still look really cool. But if you're doing well, you look really cool. To look extra special really cool, use the focus ability. As Senua stays safe from harm and manages to avoid getting hit, she builds up a focus. This eventually allows her to move much faster than your enemies. Everything goes shiny and white and slows way down, and it looks like this. Ludonarrative dissonance is a subject in gaming that lots of way smarter than me people have lots of opinions about. Totally worth looking into. But to sum it up, it concerns the fact that game components of narrative and gameplay tend to be developed independent of one another, and how sometimes that leaves us feeling like we're getting different messages from different aspects of a game. I'm only discussing ludonarrative dissonance to say that I feel like the gameplay aspect of Hellblade and its narrative aspects are actually totally integrated. I mentioned earlier how the enemies tend to attack Senua at a gradually escalating rate. On a few occasions, this escalation builds to the point where you are meant to be overwhelmed, leading to scripted, ignominious death. Without getting into it too much, these were some of my favorite moments of the game. I really admired the risks they took and what they were trying to accomplish, making a game with a character like Senua. Like most people, I can't relate to exactly what Senua has gone through. However, I have struggled with my mental health. At a certain point in my life, my issues got bad enough that I wasn't sleeping very well, and a lot of the time wasn't sleeping at all. Eventually, the sleep deprivation got to a point where I was actually experiencing some auditory and visual hallucinations. So for me, the way that the Furies spoke to Senua was familiar. I eventually got some help and some medication, and I haven't had an experience like that in a pretty long time. But I still keenly remember what it was like to have to question everything that I was seeing and everything that I was hearing, wondering how much of it was objective reality and how much of it was my flawed perspective. The voices Senua hears ebb and flow as you progress through her story. They are discouraging and abusive at times, berating her, questioning every step, telling her to turn back or give up. But at times, they serve as encouragement, celebrating her victories, warning her of impending threats, and even, eventually, comforting her when it's time to stop fighting. The voices that Senua hears are called the Furies, and Senua's relationship with them feels nuanced in a way that I could really relate to because of my own experiences. If I was trying to simplify their characterization, then I guess I'd say that they're a bit like a trickster within the text. You never really feel like you should trust them, even when they do actually help you. They come and go based on their own rules, and you can't always predict what they're going to say, even in a situation that looks a lot like one you've already experienced together. For example, the voices had several different reactions to Senua taking a hit. They might mock her and laugh at her, call her weak, or in more serious moments they might panic, try to help her, or just express frustration with her abilities. The 5 different voice actors who play the Furies do a good job of blending together and becoming somewhat homogenous even while they stand for different emotions and reactions. So even as you begin to identify them as being distinct, they are always first and foremost a part of Senua. Her inner thoughts and feelings about herself and her actions manifest into something that feels like external torment. The idea of the Furies, not as antagonists or as something strictly helpful to Senua, but more as an uncomfortable balance of torment, advantage, and character, really resonated with me. I think if I was going to completely oversimplify my own issues with mental illness, I would say that while it absolutely is a legitimate source of torment on the worst days, it also gives me a perspective that I value, and it's shaped my personality, and not entirely in ways that I regret. It's just a part of who I am, and I think that in the end, that's kind of how the Furies feel when integrated with Senua's personality. I know that this game didn't land with everyone on this level, but at the very least, I think the creators made an effort to be as authentic as possible. It felt to me like they created this character and let her very specific experience with her psychosis become the story. Fighting mental illness doesn't mean winning and walking away after a series of increasingly difficult battles in a video game, but that isn't how Hellblade is either. You don't get to win, you just fight as long as you can. Ultimately, I think that's why I had such a strong reaction to the game. It validated that fight and its inevitable conclusion. And those moments when you get overwhelmed and experience a scripted death within the game really felt like they fit with that message. For people who can't personally relate to what Senua is going through, this game is a challenging, interesting, fun, devastating empathy window. As someone who can relate, albeit on a much smaller scale, I found it to be a cathartic journey. I hesitate to recommend it universally, however, even and perhaps especially to anyone who's having these kinds of struggles, because in spite of the care, love, support, and research that went into this game, one thing I found is that it's hard to pin down what's really going to be good for any individual's personal struggle. Knowing how someone will react to a gesture of support, or in this case an 8-hour puzzle game hug of sadness, is a superpower I do not possess. And there just isn't a universal answer. It's probably the kind of thing that needs to be discerned on a case-by-case basis. So, although I'm a person who struggles with mental health and who had a very positive experience with the game, you should play it if you like puzzles, you should play it if you like Norse mythology, you should play it if you really like photo mode. You should play it if you like contemplative dives into narrative. You should play it if you like dark fantasy. You should play it if you have a special place in your heart carved out for determined cinnamon rolls committed to otherworldly quests. You should play it with your headphones on and your heart open. For me, it was exactly what I needed. I needed to see someone strong and vulnerable and hurting, doing everything that she could to accomplish a task that made sense to her and the gods alone. I needed to be her for a few hours, and to be reminded that as long as I'm still standing, the fight goes on.